Welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly editors and publishers podcast at the American Mind at the Claremont Institute. I am Ryan Williams, president of the Claremont Institute and publisher of the American Mind and the Claremont Review of Books. I'm joined by managing editor of the American Mind, Mike Sabo, associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books, and crossover editor extraordinaire, weaving together all narratives, TAM and CRB, Spencer Clavin, and then our occasional week on, week off guest and great old friend of the Institute, former VP of Education, but now editor-in-chief of Blaze Media, Matthew Peterson. Well, we thought we had to open today with Hegseth at Quantico, and maybe a little Trump at Quantico too. For observers of the military's trajectory in recent years, or really recent decades, it has been one of degraded standards, the infusion of considerations of diversity, equity, and inclusion over warfighting and mission-oriented military stuff. This kind of started, it didn't start in the Clinton years, but our colleague Will Tebow has written about this. For those of you that haven't seen it, I encourage you to go to dc.claremont.org and look at his provocation, which is these little pamphlet series of books we do. Will wrote one on DEI in the military. It's our most recent, I believe. Identity in the Trenches, I believe, is the main title. And Tebow talks about how in the Clinton years, Clinton was considering ending Don't Ask, Don't, well, not ending Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but he was considering allowing openly homosexual service members. And a lot of the brass came to him, said that if he did that, they would resign. So Clinton backed off and we got Don't Ask, Don't Tell instead. And the unofficial policy, although it was carried out with some efficiency, starting in the Clinton years and definitely galloping through the Obama years, was to weed out from the brass in the military anyone who objected to this new trajectory. Tebow points out that this really started with Bob McNamara back in the 60s, and with the rise of the Civil Rights Revolution, they wanted to put in pride of place in the military a view that the services should reflect the demography of the country rather than focus ruthlessly on meritocracy and warfighting and all the rest. So Hegseth has been signaling for a while that even before he was SecDef, it's one of the reasons he was picked. He wrote a book about this problem, and he's kind of the anti-DEI Secretary of Defense. So he called all the generals, all the officers to Quantico, which I don't know exactly how many there were, hundreds of them, and gave a pretty impassioned, well-delivered. Hegseth is one of his strengths. He's pretty good on his feet, knows how to give a good speech, is a veteran himself, and has from what I've always observed, a pretty sincerely held passion for the armed services and the best of it, and especially for warfighters. And so he gave what I think was a mix of a rousing speech, but also a lecture about the new priorities of this newly realigned military. And some of the themes of the speech were that we're getting rid of the DEI concerns. They're reforming the inspector general process in the military, which had become, I think a lot of our listeners probably know service members or are service members themselves. And they know that there's been this creeping problem of frivolous complaints against officers under various shades of cover, whether it be sexual harassment or bias incidents or whatever else. It's this tool that can be wielded especially by females in the military and diverse folks in the military, because the brass is kind of scared, or has been scared, to not appear to be solicitous of these sorts of concerns. So it's been part of the wokeification of the military as this IG process and this complaint process. Careers have been ruined, sidetracked. It's frustrated a lot of pretty competent service members who have had frivolous complaints brought against them. And so that's out the door. The old PT standards, physical fitness standards, are coming back. I think we're going back to 2015 levels, if I read correctly, and that's going to be the male PT standard will be the standard for all. And as Hegseth put it in the talk, he said, look, we love our female officers. Some of them are great, but they've got to meet the normal male standards, especially in places where physical strength is at a premium, especially in combat roles. So he said, if we might have a lot fewer women serving in those roles, but it is what it is what Hegseth said. And he said, especially in combat roles, but we have to be ruthless about this because our military is supposed to be lethal. And if we have disparate strength levels, it erodes our ability to be lethal and effective. he also, part of the PT standards, one of Hegseth's crusades, and some of our friends, including our colleague Will Tebow, who I already mentioned, Will, maybe 2 years ago during the Biden administration, caused it was sort of a personal jihad of his and our other friend and former fellow Josiah Lippincott, Hillsdale alum. Maybe Josiah even more famously because he's more belligerent on Twitter and Will is more circumspect, but mocking fat officers who, it's clear they've been riding a desk for a long time, and that's fine. You need a lot of people to ride desks, but Hegseth said that we need everyone to be in shape. I think he said something like, "It can be very tiresome to look out amongst a bunch of military folks and see a bunch of fat people." So that's going out the door. So it's a rousing speech. It's an interesting switch in policy. I'll just say one last thing. I've created a stupid acronym for this, but there have been some complaints about the Trump administration, maybe on H-1B visas, maybe on some China stuff, the TikTok thing, amongst diehard MAGA types who say, this is not what I voted for. But I think that's outweighed by the other sentiment, which you see a lot online, which is whenever any of these things happened, the Hegseth speech being the most recent, the post is something like, "This is what I voted for." And so my acronym is "This is so what I voted for," the TISWIF standard. This is so what I voted for. A turn back amongst our warfighters to the standards that made our military the envy of the world and has been that we're in dire need of recovery. So what do y'all think?
Well, I think there should be another acronym or German or Greek word, take your pick, for these moments when the media is absolutely melting down. And, sometimes they get a score, but when the media is absolutely melting down, and on the other hand, the public is going, "Oh gosh, what's this?" And even the libs really can't get too mad, right? Because something commonsensical is happening. And I think this is one of those moments where, I knew as soon as you heard about this event, this was going to be called some kind of fascist speech, fascist moment, right? We know what the drill, no matter what they say. But as it turned out, both the president and Hegseth, I think there's not a lot of there. Trump said some funny things, and then Hegseth said some things that Ryan just laid out. That's common sense to more people than are going to get angry about it. So I was genuinely concerned about the media pushing the fascist narrative. They have a lot of people who believe it, and this would be one of those moments. But I also think this is a moment where if most people look into it, they go, "Wait, they're mad about him saying that the generals are fat." I don't think anyone's going to be crying.
First of all, I think TISWIF is probably also like an old English term for an alehouse matron, like some old lady running a bar, and it makes its way into Shakespeare, like the Merry Wives of Windsor, like, "Yea, lickspittle, get ye on TISWIF." Anyway, this is neither here nor there. Matt, I am one of the normies that finds it utterly incomprehensible that there is even a dispute or a debate here. I've always found it completely mystifying how it's possible that anyone considers it necessary to evaluate our military on any other metric than how good it is at killing our enemies. Like, in every other region of life, I can at least see how you would make the case, right? Like, diversity is our strength, and we need all of these different people to contribute different experiences, and also we should have equal opportunity and equal access, et cetera, et cetera. And these are all arguments, obviously, that you can take too far, but at least you can see the premise behind them. I myself am a dewy-eyed, United Colors of Benetton 90s kid when it comes to, I want to live in that world full of all sorts of racial diversity and ethnic diversity, and I am not right wing enough to be against that in almost any other context. In the military, I don't care. I do not care how diverse the military is. If you could come up with a study that said, "We've discovered that the most lethal military is one composed exclusively of a single race, and it's Indians, or it's white people, or it's whatever," fine, go right ahead. That study won't come out because that's not actually true. But the only metric that people should be measuring by in this very specific case is how do we take guys that can kill people and make them the killingest killers that ever killed, right? How do we make them completely like the terror of the world so that America can be safe? And this, I think, is an area of life where like it's just impossible to make the leftist argument wash. And the only thing that stops people from saying that is fear and intimidation. So when a guy like Hegseth comes up and he says, look, this is all preposterous. It's fine if women want to be in the military. They have to live up to the same standards as men. We're going to do what it takes to make this fighting force the most effective in the world. Everyone at home, like 80%, 90% of people are nodding along like, like, why didn't anybody say that before? And I have to say, all the people that called Pete Hegseth a empty talking head, a Fox News host, whatever, look very silly to me now, because that forthright, direct, common sense approach to this issue is simply a win. And it's kind of embarrassing that we've even entertained other possibilities up to this point.
Yeah, I'll, before you jump in, Mike, I just want to add two more things which I missed, which is no more beardos as a mostly bearded podcast. It's fine. We're not in the military, so it's not going to affect us. But Hegseth basically said, we're going to have no more long hair, no more beards, no more weird facial hair. This was funny. He said, if you want a beard, go to the special forces. If not, you got to shave. And then the other thing, which is drawing more fire from the left or the center left even, which is they're starting in about maybe 2020. Don't quote me on that, but it wasn't that long ago. They ditched this policy of, it was maybe earlier than that, doesn't matter. But, if everyone thinks back to the scene in Full Metal Jacket with the dressing down of the new cadets or whatever they're called. Forgive me, military audience, I'm probably getting that wrong, by the drill sergeant, and the sort of hazing rituals that have lived in the military for a long time and have existed for a reason. They're not just sadism for sadism's sake, but one of the ways you break a bunch of 18 and 19-year-olds and get group cohesion is you create an us versus them, which is to say the drill sergeant against all of them together, and dressing them down for whatever, poor hygiene, being too overweight, not being ready, not knowing what the hell they're doing. So the shark attack is now allowed, which was a ritual of kind of swarming the recruits and inducing stress to get some more group cohesion, tossing beds, and even as Hegseth put it, laying hands on recruits. Although Hegseth was clear to point out that we're not advocating abuse of anyone, but we're going to loosen up a bit the older traditions of the military, which, hazing is more of a fraternity term these days, but it's because a lot of the fraternities started at military academies. And so that's sort of the civilian version, as distorted as it's become and revolved around drinking and stuff. But the OG practice has a long and storied tradition in the military, which is to, beat the boys into men and have them operate as a team.
Yeah, and I think additionally, I think they can use profanity again. I guess they couldn't do that, which is just kind of insane. Like, especially guys, fighting together in a group. That's just going to happen. So, it's just kind of pushing back nature now, like that Horace quote, like nature is actually coming back. So this is all a very good thing. I think this is another kind of 80-20 issue where your regular American's going to say, look, what have these generals done? Tons of them are overweight. They haven't won any wars in the past, at least 20 years, if not more than that. Like, why is the burden of proof on them? I just saw Terry Moran, I think he's still at ABC, said, Hegseth, the speech is totally bizarre. Our military is great. Okay. I'm sure, individual servicemen are great. They're patriotic. They obviously are doing a duty that, it is very difficult and very hard. But you look at what we've done in the past 20 years, and I'm talking about just the leadership. Why is the burden of proof on, Pete Hegseth to try to prove that something needs to change in the Department of War and in the Pentagon? This is just kind of basic common sense. I think the Trump administration and Hegseth, this is very smart. They're clearly on the right side of, I think, the issues. You want a lethal fighting force that's capable of protecting American interests, deploying American power abroad. You want to win wars. And so the best way to do that is to have a capable fighting force. I think Hegseth called this Liberation Day for America's Warriors. So kind of, reaching back to Trump's language about Liberation Day with the tariffs. it's just total common sense. And to me, it just shows how far out the left is, that they're even making any kind of crying, emojis about this. I mean, it's just kind of insane. And it just shows, look, common sense is returned. We're returning to normalcy. America has to have an army, and they actually have to be capable. We have to have a capable military. Like, duh. This is just any healthy nation, any healthy polity. This is just part of that. So it's just basic common sense at the end of the day. And it's kind of amazing and just, again, really telling that the left is pushing back on this at all.
Yeah, I mean, this is a real dimension of our politics now, is like a particularly deranged left. And it's hard not to know what to do in the face of that except win, right? I mean, these are the obvious wins, right? This is the stuff that, okay, there are other things that Trump should do, which are more delicate politically. Like, he was elected to take control of the immigration situation. Immigration situation is really out of hand. It creates all of these difficult Hobson choices. Like, some things, some forms of deportation are going to be more politically appealing than others. He's got to navigate those waters carefully. On this, like, there is just a very small sliver of the population, I think, that is going to really have time for being offended over the military going back to its roots and acting like the military, acting like a fighting force. I do not understand why it's supposed to be like something that we should bestow, a privilege that we should bestow on people to go die in America's wars, right? Like, it is a great gift and a sacrifice that people make. And, all honor and praise to them when they answer the call and step up and go put themselves in harm's way. But it's not like a human right or a civil right for fat women to go become cannon fodder in America's next war. I don't even understand like why that's something that you would want to claim as a right. Like, if you don't have to sign up for the draft, bully for you. Like, isn't that great? These things are so plain and so straightforward that you have to rack up these wins, I think, when you have the chance. It's obviously backwards to say, like, because this disabled Latina like wants to wield a gun, like, she should have the right or whatever. There is an ancient precedent for, people that are not your standard fighting age men wanting to join the army. You have like Artemisia, you have the Amazons, right? But the whole point is those people were held to the same standards as men in the battlefield, and they played on that field, and whatever glory they won on those terms. I don't even see why you would want to win glory on any other terms. I don't see why this backwards thing that we do now to appease leftists, where instead of raising people up to the standards in the institution, we lower the standards of the institution to meet people where they are. Like, that just doesn't fly. And the logic of it is so inverted, and the opposite is so common sense, that I just think you have to take this as an unalloyed win and let the left freak out over it.
And it's a weird kind of inversion too. Yeah, not only of the male female dynamic, but also like this just it sounds like, David from unpatriotic conservatives, but just like in the reverse now, where it's like, oh, the burden's on you. Yeah, like you said, Spencer, like, oh, you hate the military, you're unpatriotic. I mean, it's like, okay, and look at what happened to David Frum, so it makes total sense. But just like total kind of so disingenuous too on that side too, just trying to make this somehow the test of, whether you stand for America or not.
Yeah. And we've, for those that know men in the military, there's a kind of an ocean of anecdotes about the difficulty of drop standards in order to get more women in combat. Just to generalize one, because I don't want to name names, but, one of our former fellows recounted being on the battlefield in Afghanistan, and he had been injured, and one of their fellow service members had been shot and killed. And so they had to exfil, and they were in a live fire zone. They had to exfil the body. And so two guys were carrying the body back to the chopper, and there was one of the females with them. He was busy, so he said, can you carry his ruck to the chopper? And she made it about halfway in the same amount of time as it took everyone else to get all the way to the chopper. So basically they just had to leave, and he was stuck carrying around his fallen comrades, 60 or 80 pound ruck the rest of the the rest of their firefight and then have, for 6-7 more hours. And there are lots of examples of this. And so it's just a fact of nature, right? The bell curve for female strength is going to be a much smaller amount of people at that high end of performance, carrying around a lot of weight, ammunition, weapons, and being in a physically exhausting and stressful environment. So as Hegseth said, it is what it is. And so you'll have a lot fewer female combat members. Our colleague, I think Will, I don't want to speak for Will, but I think Will and our colleague Scott Yanner hold the view and have written a little bit about this. I know Will actually wrote for us about this, I think, which is, basically get women out of combat roles entirely, because what kind of civilization sends its wives and mothers to go fight their violent wars? There's plenty of stuff to be done in a large modern military that needs doing and that women are perfectly capable at, which doesn't extend to war fighting. But I suppose for now, they're not going to bite off all that much because maybe they don't think they can chew it, or it's not worth the fallout. I suspect they'll solve most of their problem with ruthlessly enforced meritocracy and physical fitness. We shall see. The one thing to watch is how quickly this gets implemented and what kind of rolling fallout this has. It's going to be a gold mine of leaks and media opportunities, and I suspect an aggressive comms war from the left and from critics of this policy about all the ways in which it's bad for the military, contrary to what we think and what, Mike, you've said it seems to be common sense. I will say, though, that we had to let Matt go. We're taping a little later than we normally do, and Matt has a show to go tape at the Blaze. So we will watch this development with some eagerness. We'll see what members of the brass decide to leave and maybe why they talk about how they left. That'll be part of this rolling comms effort against this policy. But from where we sit, it's a good development. We also want to talk, it sort of slipped onto the cutting room floor for us last week, which was that Kamala Harris has published a book about her brief and failing stint as the Democratic nominee for president. I wanted to lead with this hilarious anecdote that was reported on social media because people thought, like I did, it was hilarious. But apparently, Kamala Harris said she called Gavin Newsom for an endorsement after Biden's exit, but he brushed her off with a short text. This was from Leading Report, one of the Twitter news feeds. Newsom replied by text, "Hiking, will call back," and never followed up. So this, when I shared this with the group chat, Sabo's response was, "I kind of like Gavin Newsom."
Right.
It's like a classic spurned, possible girlfriend thing. It's like he just kind of ghosted her and brushed her off. It's a very Gavin thing to do, but also a very human thing to do. And clearly he wanted none of that noise. One of the other tidbits that I thought was pretty good was Kamala reporting that Biden called her before her debate with Trump and sort of ranted a little bit at her and said, he would have been fine and he should have stayed in. And it was sort of distracting her at this prime moment and to her in kind of old man rant, which just illustrates what we all know was the case, which is that Biden was not up to the job. But in true Biden fashion, he insisted vehemently that all the things that people saw and knew to be true were not, in fact, true, and that he was awesome and he regretted getting out, which is a funny thing to do when you call your former vice president, who is now at the top of the ticket. There was one last, I think, I'm sure the book is full of these things and they're kind of trickling out as people pan the book, but it's actually pretty much already receded in the news cycle for obvious reasons, given the tumult of the last couple of weeks in national news. But the other thing was she reported some quite high number of trans deaths in America, and someone ran down the numbers scrupulously and with great attention to research detail, which included 4 minutes of Googling, which showed that she was plucking the trans death statistics from, I think, the West in general and plopped them into American life. So it exacerbated a fake problem to prove one of her points. So I think, Spencer, we have a review cooking for this book in the next CRB, so everyone should keep an eye out for that. It'll be a few months because we're doing a double ip 25th anniversary issue, so it probably won't be in your mailboxes till maybe December. But one thing to look out for. I don't know what am I missing from this whole delicious event of Kamala publishing a book?
The current CRB is like one of those charge shots in a video game. We are currently like gathering the plasma energy into our blaster, but we're going to do it for a little extra time so that it will come out in truly spectacular, multicolored 16-bit fashion because it's our 25th anniversary and it's our birthday, so we can party if we want to. I don't know. I think the best part of the Atlantic excerpt, at least, that I
Oh yeah.
read, which was the first one that came out from this book, was the absolutely Olympic level gold medal acrobatics that went on around the issue of whether Kamala was wrong not to tell Joe to back out earlier. Because if she, let's see how this works. She stood by him until he backed out, at least publicly, which means that either she was lying right up until that point to the public about her awareness that he was actually totally unfit to run, or she simply didn't know and was such a loyalist, such a kind of slavish loyalist that she realized but wouldn't say anything. And so she goes on this like long and for this book relatively oblique kind of side eye rant. Most of the time in this book she's quite happy to throw, as far as I can tell, absolutely everybody under the bus. I'm hard pressed to name a person that she does not stab in the back in just this like several thousand word excerpt. But on this point, she has to tread a very, very delicate line because her own behavior is so obviously craven and dishonest, as was that of basically everybody aligned with her and everybody who subsequently supported her in her 107-day run for president. So she begins with, I am a loyal person, which is one of those things that if somebody is saying it out loud, it's almost guaranteed not to be true. It's like, I am an honest person. You know that you don't have to say that if it's true. I am a loyal person, which means exactly the opposite. And therefore, I did have inclinations that he was deteriorating, but also he was better on a bad day than Donald Trump is on a good day. But also it was would have been kind of dishonest of me to throw Biden under the bus like I'm doing now. And then in addition, they never gave me any good press. There's then like a long thing about how she was out there doing the work among the proud Black women. And she was assigned to this very minor, small element of border crossings, and Republicans lied about her being a border czar, and the White House had Karine Jean-Pierre out there every day, and they never pushed back, and they never contradicted, and they just left me out in the cold to dry, as if the entire Democrat media complex apparatus didn't, as one, unite, turn like the fish crowd in SpongeBob, the townspeople in Bikini Bottom who all at one moment, like mouths hanging open, turn toward her and suddenly discover that Kamala is brat and we love her. None of that was enough. It was all the fault of everybody in the entire world, so far as I can tell, with the one exception of Kamala Harris, that Kamala Harris did not win the presidency. From reading this book, the only person there's no responsibility or blame whatsoever for Kamala Harris's presidential loss is Kamala Harris. Absolutely everybody else is guilty. The blood is on our hands. There is systemic anti-Kamaladom written into the very DNA of all voting American citizens. That does seem to be the kind of thesis of this book. And I can only conclude from it that Kamala is over. I mean, there was some time when she was supposed to be governor of California or something. I feel that she's kind of trying to grab the bag and run with this, because it's really hard to come back from a performance as unappealing as this one.
I don't know. I mean, with what I'm going to read, I'm totally stunned that she didn't win. So this is an actual excerpt from the book. I wish I could have gotten the message across that there isn't a distinction between they, them, and you. The pronoun that matters is we the people, and that's who I am for. I mean, just the profundity of that is amazing. I mean, it's like I was reading a script from Veep. I mean, it's just that poor and that out of
Yeah.
touch.
He
And
also
that,
just stole it from Obama.
right. It's just like warmed over, D grade, D minus grade Obama, basically. I mean, it's just, yeah. And this is actually something I'm writing about for the American Mind right now. But you look. I mean, this is kind of the whole DEI regime. Like these are the kind of people they produce. I mean, envy, prideful, arrogant, self-centered. Like this is just the total opposite of basically like the Republican virtue that, say, Madison talked about in Federalist 55, that Republican government needs, that self-government requires. And I mean, there's excerpts, I think, that the Washington Post ran too that are just absolutely hilarious. Oh, and like you said, Spencer, I mean, just throwing everybody under the bus, declining Josh Shapiro. I guess, the vibes in some critical interview weren't good. Oh, what about Pete Buttigieg for vice president? Well, this is a quote. We were already asking a lot of America to accept a black woman married to a Jewish man. It was too big a risk. I mean, come on. Like, that is just, how stupid do you think Americans are? And just, again, more evidence of why she just got absolutely just crushed in that election.
Yeah, well, that sorry, Mike, just to interrupt, but that quote is so perfect because it again absolves her of any responsibility and imputes her loss to latent racism.
Mm-hmm.
And then also is like, and I really would have liked to have a gay on the ticket, but America is also homophobic, so that wouldn't work either.
Bigoted American people, showing their racism and xenophobia and isms, again, for the billionth time.
One thing to have a black woman on the ticket, but we can't have a big old like, come on now. That's too much.
Yeah. I mean, it's
just the demographic that really like sunk the ship was having a on the ticket. But all right, Mike, put me out of my misery.
Yeah. So, I mean, this anecdote too, I mean, this was probably the thing that shouldn't have stunned me that did. I mean, her team, especially how it was reported in the Washington Post, I mean, they absolutely felt confident going into election night that they were going to beat Trump. They thought all their analytics actually internally showed that they were actually ahead in all the battleground states. After they found out, they lost, I mean, she got absolutely annihilated. This section's great. Harris's social secretary peeled icing that read "Madam President" off the cupcakes that had been ordered for the occasion and sent them out to the campaign staffers along with wine, of course. When Jen O'Malley Dillon, Harris's campaign manager, broke the news, Harris recalls being in shock, barely able to breathe. She repeated over and over, "My God, what will happen to our country?" Like,
yeah, I'm sure that's what she was thinking.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure it was more, my God, what am I going to do now?
Right. Like, uh-oh. Yeah. My political future is totally gone.
Today in events that definitely occurred, Kamala Harris hyperventilating over the pure noxious fumes of her patriotism. What I love about that Pete Buttigieg anecdote is Pete Buttigieg subsequently said, "I do not recall having any sort of discussion about this."
Right.
This is news to me.
Oh, it's amazing. So she probably made it up anyway. Yeah. Well, we really considered Pete. Well, you didn't talk to him, but.
And also just Ryan, you kind of mentioned this, the projection onto the American people of the inherent and grotesque prejudice of the Democrat calculus, right? It was like basically Jews are too unpopular with our base right now, rather than we just don't feel comfortable standing with Israel because we are cowards and we suck. Not that that's what you would write in your presidential memo, but I feel like the pronoun that really matters here is what. As in, what happened, the title of Hillary Clinton's version of this particular genre. And I would like now to read the Joe Biden presidential memoir, What's Happening, as in what is currently going on. I honestly feel like he must be, in the moments when the crystal lucidity of his mind pierces the fog of dementia, he must really feel extraordinarily vindicated.
No,
but these people deserve each other.
Biden's book title would be what?
Question mark.
WHA ... question mark. Here's the deal. Oh man, It seems like so long ago. It was not that long ago. Yeah, I think we've beaten that horse to death. Also, I should just remark though, Kamala did learn the snide is not the right word, and backhanded compliment's not the right word. What adjective am I looking for? This was Obama's technique too. Even though he won and then won re-election, he would not constantly, but would occasionally drop. And Michelle kind of did this too in her own way. That whatever shortcomings his administration or their ability to sell their policies or their comeuppance in the 2010 midterm elections, it's always, well, yeah, America did elect me the first black president, but America really still isn't ready for a black president. So that's why we're really not getting anything done. Or that's why we've got all this blowback coming our way, or that's why division is growing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's one of his more annoying traits. It's like the mix of hectoring and lecturing the populace, but always being of a piece of kind of defending himself and excusing his failures of rhetoric or execution or hope and changery.
Yeah, Kamala does a little tongue cluck exactly like that at the end of the Atlantic excerpt. The last line of which I think is, "They just didn't get it," referring to the Biden team, that they couldn't understand what was so great about her, and therefore they weren't constantly trumpeting her from the rooftops. I mean, the subtext of all of this press complaint, if indeed any of it is reflective of reality, is that the Biden administration, shambolic and embarrassing as it was in its own right, was even more uncomfortable admitting that Kamala Harris was the second in command. Like, she was, up until the very last moment, one of the Biden administration's biggest press liabilities, something we're apt to forget because Biden became such a problem for the Democrats. But she herself, that is Kamala, was a DEI acquisition from the fever days of 2020. She was somebody, much like a lot of the TV shows that are now having to be quietly axed or edited season by season because they were greenlit in the summer of Floyd, and the mood that dominated that moment has now so passed that they look absolutely absurd. Like, Kamala Harris is the Apple TV Plus foundation of the American political system. Like, she's the person that the only reason that you would ever choose her is if you were completely high on the 2020 moment, like just deep in the noxious fume, face in the bag, inhaling the opium of 2020. And you think, well, I must have not just a Black woman, because remember, it's not actually enough to tick whatever demographic box. You need that demographic box to come attached to somebody willing to openly state the most absurd, extreme ideological positions of the radical left. And ideally, you need somebody whose only merit is that willingness, because that's how you really prove that your commitment to the cause, your willingness to do the work, transcends all your other considerations, including, oh, I don't know, whether this person is aptly suited to the job. And so Kamala was, in that sense, or in that sense only, the perfect vice president for Joe Biden to pick in the moment when he was assembling his ticket. Immediately after that, as the afterglow of the Floyd summer faded, it became obvious that they had made a terrible, terrible mistake. And I think of a line from a wonderful a negative review of an obscure classics book in which the author had made some terrible mistake in Greek. And Martin West, the wonderful Oxford Don, wrote, "Their blood will surely run cold when they realize what they have done." That's sort of what I imagine happened to the Biden team, is that suddenly, like, the hangover passed and they realized, like, this person is a radioactive toxin in the bloodstream of this environment. That's why nobody was ever putting her out in front of the camera, is that she shot herself in the foot every time it happened. And then she's like, oh, they didn't get it. They didn't understand. They just weren't ready for a strong, proud Black woman with a mental deficit.
Yeah, that's if the Democratic electorate had a book of their retrospective on this whole thing, it would be, oh no.
Right. What have we done? Yes.
What would have been. But, the Biden-Harris duo will have the gratitude of 60 or 70 million Americans because they helped us avoid a Kamala presidency or a second Biden administration. So there's that at least. We wanted to end the substantive part of the podcast before some cultural wrecks with discussion of this big, expensive New York City subway campaign that Avi Schiffman, CEO of Friend.com, purchased to run for his product, which is you, Spencer, you I think know it better than I, but it's like this. It's a necklace, among other things. Maybe that's the only device they have. Maybe it's one version of their device, but it's your AI friend. This is the friend they're referring to. And some of you have maybe seen these. I haven't been in New York. I haven't seen them in the flesh, but they're plastered all over subway stops, panels along the walkways and in the subway cars. It was apparently $1 million ad campaign. And it's just plain white with text and then the link, the website friend.com. Some of the catch lines for this new product, which will be your AI friend, are I'll never leave dirty dishes in the sink. I'll never bail on our dinner plans. I'll binge the entire series with you. And Avi is sort of leaning into the absurdity of this. Apparently he picked New York because they hate AI in New York. This was news to me, but it's okay. We'll take that for what it is. And he said he wanted to leave a lot of white space. This may be a kind of ex post facto justification, but who knows? We'll give him the benefit of the doubt. And he defended it, saying, I wanted the public interaction with it, that is to say, scrawled graffiti on them, to be part of the ad experience. And one of them says friend, spelled normally, and then in brackets, like a dictionary entry, friend, FREND, which I guess is a nod to the internet. It should be friend, but maybe that would be too much of a nod to the alt-right. And then noun, someone who listens, responds, and supports you. And some people had scrawled on that one. They cross out someone and put AI chatbot. And then at the bottom, they put AI wouldn't care if you lived or died. Another scrawl was stay human, my friends. We wanted to highlight this pretty creepy ad campaign. You could run a fun counter ad campaign. It sounds like you don't need to in New York because people are responding pretty negatively to this, but I suspect Avi likes that because all press is good press. But some other phrases came to my mind, like I will never keep your pillow next to you warm at night. I will never improve your soul. I will never be a true friend. I will be this weird, creepy facsimile. It's sort of gallows humor, so forgive us. But the AI friend will be equally encouraging if you choose not to commit suicide, or if you describe that you really need to commit suicide. They will help you either way. So we have this latest iteration of this newly emerging weird substitution for real life friendship and companionship with AI. So we're vaulting ourselves into the land of fairly recent science fiction, with probably the best treatment of this being this movie, Her, where Scarlett Johansson is the AI friend to, who's the actor? I'm drawing a blank.
Joaquin Phoenix.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, I don't know. Spencer knows this ad campaign even better than I do. There was some Black Mirror live ad version of this. Is that right, Spencer?
Yeah, this thing, I think, and I may be getting the timeline a little bit wrong, but I recall the ad for this product going viral kind of before the AI craze, like before ChatGPT entered all of our consciousness and we started talking about, is it going to take over the world and turn us all into paper clips, etc. I think they were already working on this product, which is in itself kind of a convoluted pitch. At least to me, it's very difficult to understand what exactly this thing does. It's a pendant that you wear around your neck. And obviously the concept is there's an imaginary AI person on the other end to keep you company and chat with you and observe what's going on. This in itself is a deranged way of looking at things. It has nothing to do with the reality of what large language models are and aren't capable of doing, but leave that aside for a moment. It seems like your friend texts you randomly, like you get these little push notifications the way you might from an SMS or an Apple iMessage. And also you can like touch the pendant and talk to your friend as if they were there. There's a Wired article called "I Hate My Friend," which I really think is hilarious, and it's about how clunky the technology is. In addition to, so it's a rich text because it does seem, as you say, Ryan, that the main kind of company representative, I don't know if he's the CEO or what, but
maybe he's head of marketing or something.
Yeah, he definitely seems to have a degree of self-awareness and engagement with what he knows will be people's reaction, horror, disgust. He's leaning into the meme that sometimes goes around where it's like, I'm Joe Schmo, author of The Torment Nexus, a cautionary tale. And then it's CEO of Torment Nexus Industries. I'm pleased to report that we have created the Torment Nexus from the novel The Torment Nexus. That's sort of the way that this ad material is pitched on purpose. It's like they took Black Mirror and they made it into a pitch deck. But for me, it's always, I think, more fruitful to look at this stuff not as a harbinger of some apocalypse that may yet come, spinning out predictions about how it's going to gain sentience or pass the Turing test or whatever sort of metaphysically ill-judged hype that people are saying, but to actually evaluate currently existing AI and the way that it is now distorting and deforming our civilization. And this is a really good example of this, because preying upon pre-existing pathologies, the epidemic of loneliness, the disintegration of civil society, the crisis of friendship and the degradation of it by social media into a kind of transactional interaction that has nothing to do with the classical idea of shared love of virtue and between two noble souls, right? All of that is now funneling into the channels of this slop gunk producing technology to not to create a genuine convincing entity that we could really imagine is alive, not to seduce already existing well-adjusted people who have made their way through this world into becoming kind of slack-jawed virtual reality denizens, but instead to scoop up young, misguided, confused, lonely, isolated people into an addictive feedback loop that will just increase their problems while promising to fix them. So, I mean, it's a perfect little encapsulation of how this stuff works, because it's surrounded by all sorts of flotsam about like, oh, will this actually become well, one day we have real robots or whatever. And in actuality, it's just making everything worse. It's also an incredibly stupid use of this otherwise beautiful technology. Well, at least potentially useful technology, which is the large language model and AI in general. I everything is the worst that it could be, and I hate it. That's my
Yeah, so I guess I think the founder, the CEO, Avi Schiffman is his name. So he, yeah, like I think Ryan said, spent $1 million on this. I guess these ads are showing up in car cards, 1,000 platform posters. I think probably one of my favorite things that people have written on the ads is surveillance capitalism, stop profiting off loneliness, AI trash. So those are some of the feedback that New Yorkers, I mean, not surprisingly, have given to that. I mean, one of the many problems with this, so I guess this device listens to conversations without being prompted, tracks interactions, offers just kind of unsolicited commentary. You can tap it to hear a response, and I guess you can hear it through voice, or it goes through text. I mean, it's just like Spencer, the things that you're pointing out. I mean, you think of the importance of friendship for, say, Aristotle, talking about, civic friendship, and then even higher forms of that to really kind of bind a polity together. And you think about, Tocqueville came to mind too, where it's, you have a towering state on one side, and then you just have a mass of individuals without basically any connections, what he, called individualism on the other side. And those are really two sides of the same coin. You have these kind of atomistic people just kind of drifting through life. And it's like, this guy, I mean, he could have actually done something where he built coalitions, he built networks where, real people could actually interact and form bonds. Instead, he's just keeping them like totally isolated, totally alienated, which is an irony, because I guess he said he created it after 40 international flights, and he was in Tokyo, and it was kind of, lost in translation, and he just felt alone. So he created this. It's like, well, that's only going to make actually that problem worse, like you said, Spencer. So this is just, I think, a harbinger of obviously not good things that are coming in the future that I think we definitely need to resist. And we really need to get back to some forms of analog. I mean, meeting in person, having real life friends, and not just, even people on your group chats. I mean, you need to see people in real life and form bonds. I mean, that's the only way that people will actually have the will, do things together, actually live a good life. I mean, if you look at just one last thing, even I think Arthur Millick, our former executive director of the Center for American Way of Life, he said the problem was, say, in the USSR, what the Soviets didn't like. You could almost say anything even negative about the leadership in power. What they didn't like was people actually banding together to start to form, to maybe do something about it, to maybe overthrow, to act, to form political communities. That's what they didn't like. And so this is interesting that this circumvents kind of that entire thing, and just it's a feedback loop of yet more loneliness, alienation, and exactly the problems that it says it's going to correct, and it's just going to just make them 10,000 times worse.
Yeah, I'd be fascinated too to see longitudinal. I mean, if something like this took off, longitudinal kind of brain activity studies of, what if your inner dialogue, inner monologue is replaced by your AI friend? I I don't quote me, but I remember seeing at one point there's been a lot of studies about sort of cognitive psychology and how people process information, and I I remember reading somewhere that there's actually fairly substantial portion of the population that really has no inner monologue or inner dialogue. I can't really think that that's true, but I think it was associated with the rise of, or the decrease of reading and inner imagination and the rise of screens and all else. So this would be the last thing you'd want to introduce into this already degraded cultural, individual imagination environment after years and years of replacing the great cultural wellsprings and creative wellsprings of Western civilization, or really any civilization that is being learned and reading and stoking imagination as young children, and replacing it all with screens and robots. It can't bode well for self-government and a lot of other things. Speaking of the cultural wellsprings of civilization, we're on to our last segment, some recommendations. I'm going to cop out once again because I'm here actually in Los Angeles on September 30th. You all will hear this, I think, on October 2nd, but we're doing an evening event at an undisclosed secure location in West LA for this new book that just dropped today, which I was the editor of, a slim but punchy volume called Fighting Enemies, Foreign and Domestic, The Legacy of Angelo Codevilla. Some friends of Angelo's got together a year and a half ago now to mourn his passing and to remember his great insights and his body of work and his wonderful and brilliant career, both in government and in scholarship. So I encourage everyone to go pick up a copy. Beautiful, graced on the cover by Lee Brown, one of the kind of Twitter artists. Sorry, Lee, I don't mean to pigeonhole you too much, but that's how I first encountered you. She started sort of watercoloring the new right a few years back, and she did one of Angelo Codevilla. I think I commissioned it from a picture, but it's a beautiful picture of Angelo on the cover of the book by Encounter. And then I just wanted to use the occasion to remind people of some old books that Angelo wrote, some kind of old and some quite old, that really hold up well. And if you are interested in how our conduct of foreign policy has gone off the rails over the last century with the rise of progressivism and its insinuation into foreign policy thinking in both parties, I commend to you Angelo's books on this subject. And also go to ClaremontReviewBooks.com and just go check out all of Angelo's writings. A lot of it was on foreign policy, but not all of it. He started writing for us right when the magazine started in 2001, or really 2000, and then really picked up once the global war on terror started with a series we originally called Victory Watch, but then we dropped the kind of segmented title after a while, and it was just Angelo, usually on this subject that he liked to write about because it is one that he knew well, which is foreign policy, international relations, and our ruling class's failure in these regards. One really old one, which is recommended by Mike Waller, who's been a longtime senior fellow and expert at the Center for Security Policy, and Mike knows the intelligence world quite well. This book called Informing Statecraft Intelligence for a New Century. Angelo was in and around the Senate right when the Church Committee was wrapping up their work on the CIA. Angelo was quite close with Bill Casey, who ran the CIA back in those years. And Angelo was really working on this Select Committee on Intelligence in the Senate for Malcolm Wallop, a now deceased senator from the Midwest. But Angelo was really the CIA guy, and he struck fear into the hearts of agency folks. And as Mike Waller points out, Angelo, it's not that he didn't like the secrecy of the CIA. What he really didn't like was their kind of serial untruthfulness. And he packed a lot of this insight into this book, Informing Statecraft. And as Mike Waller says in our little volume, unfortunately, the CIA didn't really heed any of Angelo's warnings. It didn't reform itself. The political masters of it didn't reform it through a couple of administrations. It really got forced into some reform after 9/11, but it drew all the wrong reasons and just exacerbated its kind of ruling class, insular, haughty, above it all. We know best. Trust us. We know all the secrets. If you think you're lying, we can't explain to you why exactly we're telling the truth because that's classified after all. That's sort of the ethos of the modern CIA, which Angelo hated. And he thought it made for a bad intelligence service, which would be a disservice to the country. So a couple more. Advice to War Presidents, a remedial course in statecraft that was written partly in response to the disasters of Iraq and Afghanistan. His classic, The Character of Nations, How Politics Makes and Breaks Prosperity, Family, and Civility, a kind of old school Aristotelian look at how we need to understand other countries before we go meddling in their affairs. And then I've mentioned it before, but finally his last book, although I hear that there's a manuscript that his son David is editing. I need to get in touch with David and see where this is at. There might be one final book out that Angelo was hard at work on when he unfortunately lost his life in a car accident. But his last official book that's still out, called America's Rise and Fall Among Nations, Lessons in Statecraft from John Quincy Adams, which grew out of a long memo he was commissioned to write for the first Trump administration's Office of Net Assessment at the Department of Defense. Anyway, go read Angelo. You will profit from him greatly. He also was a great student. I mean, Angelo spoke and read French, Italian, and English. He may have dabbled in a couple others. He certainly knew Latin. And he wrote his dissertation on France, modern France, and knew a lot about Charles de Gaulle. So anyway, Angelo, a throwback scholar. We don't see many of his kind anymore. We'll never see the individual sui generis likes of Angelo ever. He was a wonderful man, a great scholar, a patriot, and a passionate first-generation immigrant lover of America. Came over to the U.S., I think when he was 6 or 8, had running hot water for the first time in his life, came from Italy, of course, on the boat that he came over on, and would always be grateful for that. Sort of taught himself English by reading the New York Times and hearing Winston-Salem cigarette ads. Learned a knife fight to defend himself in elementary school in rowdy New York. Delivered papers to mob bosses. Anyway, a lot of that and more is recounted in our little volume by a great eulogy from his son, Thomas. Angelo, we miss you. Everyone should go read him.
Love that guy. And yes, there will never be another. I like his essay on fascism as well. I don't think you mentioned it in the recent CRB. Okay, before I issue my brief recommendation, I would like to state a few points of order about terms for white people who like Japanese culture. Ryan knows and shares with me a love of all things Japanese. However, it's important to get your terms straight. Do not misapply these, or you may be subject to lawsuit. A gaijin is a foreigner of any kind. So from the Japanese perspective, somebody who is not Japanese is a gaijin. A hakujin is a white person, also of any kind. But since the Japanese are not hakujin, all gaijin are hakujin. A Japanophile, properly speaking in Japanese, is called a shinnichi, a lover of Japan. And this is the, shall we say, value neutral way to describe somebody who is not Japanese, but is particularly interested in Japanese culture. I suppose technically you could be a Japanophile and also Japanese, but most of the time, Japanophile is not Japanese. A weeb is somebody obsessed with Japanese at a kind of Reddit or 4chan level. The term originates with 4chan and has no actual meaning in Japanese. But this is the kind of guy you might see stocking his basement room with manga and other Japanese paraphernalia. Likewise, an otaku, also an actual Japanese word, is an obsessive to the detriment of his other abilities. So perhaps even one step further than a weeb, an otaku is unsuccessful in life because of his interest in anime, manga, video games, etc., etc. So people such as myself who deeply appreciate Japanese culture, know a little bit of Japanese, are excited about all things Japanese, we prefer the term shinnichi, or even perhaps ironically reclaiming the term weeb. If you choose to call us otaku, just know that them's fighting words. All right. Having said that, it's Halloween, and the Japanese are great at many things, but one thing they're excellent at is ghost stories. So I would commend to our listeners two things. First of all, the classic movie Kwaidan, which means ghost story in Japanese, and is 4 beautifully shot, short, so 40-minute long each, traditional ghost stories of the Japanese countryside. Eerie, grotesque, strange, evocative, sad, beautiful. And then for the real otaku among us, I have just started actually, and really been enjoying Demon Slayer, Kimetsu no Yaiba, the Sword of Demon Destruction, which is an anime, but one that is not too over the top or in your face, and you will not get sucked by it down a hole that ends in tentacle porn. So Kimetsu no Yaiba and Kwaidan for the spooky season.
So I want to add another Codavilla piece. Actually, it was a memo that he wrote for the American Mind. Abolish FISA, reform FBI, and break up CIA. That's a fantastic long piece that really goes through, really what should be done and kind of the post, World War II kind of security state, and how, having it and just keeping it intact is really harmful for American interests. So I would definitely advise reading that piece. And then for my culture recommendation, so October baseball is I think started today, and somehow my favorite team, the Cleveland Indians, actually got in. So they were 15 and a half games back in the AL Central. Detroit Tigers led it. I think this was about maybe half a month ago, and they actually ended up winning the AL Central, which is a feat that's actually never been done before. I don't think a team has ever come back from that deficit to actually win. So just a remarkable charge at the end of the season. They played their first playoff game today against the Tigers. Unfortunately, they lost. Tarek Skubal looked like pitched, got 14 strikeouts. I mean, he had an outstanding game. He's one of the game's great pitchers today for the Detroit Tigers. He's their ace. Really wish we had him. But, the Indians have also had a great storied tradition of having great pitchers. Cliff Lee, CC Sabathia before he went to the Yankees. Shane Bieber, who he got injured. He won the Cy Young, I think, his very first year actually in baseball. So we had to trade him away, I think, to the Toronto Blue Jays. But we've definitely had some great pitchers come through. But anyway, going to be obviously watching that. Hope they make it to the divisional round. And playoff baseball the atmosphere is always fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to watching some.
Yeah, we had an almost miraculous comeback. Something I mentioned last week in the Ryder Cup. Ryder Cup is 3 days. It's the European team, pan-European team versus the U.S. The Europeans dominated us in the first 2 days. We were down 8 points or something, and almost came back. Ended up losing by 1.5, maybe 2 points. But Europe won the Ryder Cup in the United States, so we kind of squandered our home field advantage at this storied famous course in New York called Bethpage Black. But it was handed to the Europeans. They played lights out golf, almost to a man, the first 2 days. So they were very hard to beat, and ultimately proved too hard to beat. But I don't get that mad, because the PGA Tour in general is populated by a bunch of guys of pretty good, upstanding character and civic involvement. Not all of them, across the pond. And so it's hard to be too angry at our European friends, especially because they invented the game. But it still rankles a little bit. Anyway, well, that's all we have time for this week. Thank you all once again for listening to the Roundtable. If you'd like to learn more about our work, go to www.claremont.org. If you want to support our work, just put a /donate at the end of that. Go to dc.claremont.org for the latest out of our Center for the American Way of Life. We have an upcoming, is it out yet? It's maybe almost on the cusp of being out. I mentioned Will Tebow's provocation, but we also have one. We have one coming out from Scott Yenner, and Will Tebow did some research on it and worked with Scott on it, on the Virginia Military Institute and the effects of VMI going from all men to integrated in the last 30 years. So keep an eye out for that. Go to theamericanmind.org, of course, for all things TAM, ClaremontReviewBooks.com for our flagship publication, which turns 25 this year. We'll be celebrating in New York on November 6th. If you have $1,000 lying around, sorry, that's just the nature of New York dinners for fundraising dinners. We'd love to have you. You can find info at just Google Claremont Golden Age, and you'll find our Golden Age Agenda website, and you can go to the CRB dinner if you shell out the cash. And thank you all once again for listening. Thanks to the engineering and production crew, the brothers Gannon, Jake and Ryan Gannon, and we will talk to you all next week.